The clatter of silver on porcelain died instantly. The jazz band abruptly stopped mid-note, the saxophonist lowering his brass instrument, as if it had suddenly turned to lead. A suffocating silence slammed into the crowded, opulent dining room, thick enough to choke on. Standing amidst the frozen patrons was Nathan, the undisputed king of the city's underworld, his tailored obsidian suit immaculate, his dark eyes locked onto the trembling figure of Stella. The waitress stood frozen, a bruised, crimson handprint blooming violently against the pale porcelain of her cheek. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over the fresh, cruel mark. Nathan didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The terrifying softness of his tone cut through the dead air like a straight razor. "Who touched you?" he asked, and in that moment, the entire city went silent. To understand the silence that fell over Il Paradiso that evening, one must understand the deafening noise of Stella's everyday life. A 23-year-old art student, she was a ghost of the working class, measuring her survival in minimum wage shifts and the crushing weight of her younger brother's medical bills. Invisibility was her shield. Beneath the restaurant's glittering chandeliers, she perfected the choreography of servitude, pouring vintage Barolo, ignoring wandering eyes, and remaining entirely unseen. But Thursday nights were dangerous. The lines between legitimate wealth and subterranean power blurred, and tonight the danger emanated from Table 4. Marcus Vance, a rising lieutenant in the volatile Romano family, sat center stage in a garish blue suit, radiating cheap pomade and aggressive arrogance. He had been drinking heavily, his laughter jagged and loud. Stella approached with practiced grace, balancing a heavy silver tray. "Veal scallopine for you, sir," she murmured, her eyes averted. "I said no capers," Marcus slurred. Stella's heart did a sickening flutter. "I apologize, sir. The traditional lemon butter sauce comes with, did I ask for a culinary lesson, sweetheart?" His bloodshot eyes snapped to hers. "No, sir. I will have it remade immediately." She reached to take the plate back, but Marcus's heavy, ring-adorned hand shot out in a cruel, dismissive swat. He caught the edge of the porcelain. The plate flipped, launching searing lemon butter sauce and veal directly onto his bright blue lapels. Stella gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Marcus stood, his chair scraping violently. The creeping red of fury crawled up his thick neck. Before Stella could process the danger, his arm swung back. The slap was thunderous. The force lifted her off her feet, sending her crashing backward into the serving station. Crystal water glasses shattered into a chaotic symphony. Pain exploded across her face, the metallic tang of blood flooding her mouth. As she collapsed amid the crystal shards, the jazz band faltered. The room's hum was decapitated. Marcus stood over her, chest heaving. "Stupid bitch." Stella lay frozen on the cold floor, waiting for the end of her invisible life. Everyone knew who Marcus was. Nobody was going to save a waitress. And then, the heavy mahogany double doors at the front of the restaurant opened. Nathan Vance, no relation to the brute currently standing over Stella. A tragic irony of the city's phone book, did not walk. He drifted. He moved with the terrifying, silent grace of a deep-water predator, a creature so accustomed to absolute apex dominance that it no longer needed to display aggression. To the police, he was a phantom, an impenetrable fortress of legitimate businesses, shell companies, and high-priced lawyers. To the streets, he was a god made of frost and cordite. He was the head of the ruling syndicate, a man who had inherited a chaotic, blood-soaked empire from his father, and systematically sanitized it, turning street-level barbarism into a sleek, corporate machine of illicit trade. Nathan was 34, but his eyes looked ancient. They were the color of wet slate, absorbing light but reflecting nothing. He wore a bespoke three-piece suit the color of a starless midnight, cut perfectly to a physique forged in the violent crucible of his youth. There were no flashy rings on his fingers, no ostentatious watches on his wrist. True power, Nathan knew, didn't need to shout. It merely needed to breathe. He had come to Il Paradiso for a quiet dinner, a rare moment of solitude away from the ledger books, the endless meetings with corrupt aldermen, and the exhausting burden of keeping the city's various warring factions from tearing each other apart. His driver and closest confidant, a massive, stoic man named Leo, walked exactly 3 paces behind him. As Nathan stepped through the doors, the maitre d', a man who usually greeted billionaires with a practiced, obsequious smile, turned the color of old parchment. He bowed so deeply his forehead nearly touched his knees, unable to form words. Nathan didn't look at him. His senses, honed by a lifetime of paranoia and survival, immediately registered the wrongness in the air. A restaurant of this caliber was supposed to sound like a low melodic hum, the clinking of crystal, the soft murmur of wealthy secrets, the light jazz from the corner. Instead, it was dead. The silence was heavy, vibrating with the electric charge of recent violence. The smell of expensive food was suddenly overwhelmed by the sharp, undeniable scent of ozone and fear. Nathan's slate eyes swept the room. The patrons were frozen like mannequins in a macabre diorama. Forks held, suspended halfway to mouths, eyes wide, darting nervously. Then, his gaze found the epicenter, table 4. A man standing, chest puffed out, in a pathetic display of dominance. A dark stain on his blue suit, and beneath him, sprawled on the floor amidst a sea of shattered glass, a girl in a black and white uniform. Nathan stopped. The world around him seemed to slow to a glacial crawl. He didn't know the girl. He had never seen her before, but he saw the stark, horrifying contrast of the scene, the opulent surroundings, the gold leaf on the ceiling, the soft candlelight, and the brutal, ugly reality of a young woman bleeding on the floor, her white apron stained with water and a slow drip of crimson. He saw the violent, swelling red handprint blooming across the porcelain skin of her cheek. He saw the way she curled in on herself, a defensive instinct against a world that had just reminded her of her utter powerlessness. Nathan's moral code was a complex, twisted thing. He had ordered the deaths of men. He had ruined lives, collapsed economies, and built an empire on the bones of his enemies. He was, by all societal definitions, a monster, but his brutality was always calculated, always directed at those who had chosen to enter the game. He abhorred chaotic violence, and above all, he harbored a deep, violent disgust for those who preyed on the helpless. A man who beat a waitress was not a man. He was an animal, and animals who forgot their place needed to be put down. He recognized the man in the blue suit, Marcus Romano, a loudmouthed, ambitious idiot who had been testing boundaries for months. Nathan took a step forward. The sound of his leather shoe tapping against the hardwood floor echoed through the silent room like the first crack of thunder before a catastrophic storm. Leo, standing behind him, felt the sudden, terrifying drop in the air temperature. It was a subtle shift in Nathan's posture, a tightening of the jaw, a sudden, blinding stillness. Leo quietly slid his hand beneath his tailored jacket, resting his fingers on the cold grip of his suppressed pistol. He didn't know what Nathan was about to do, but he knew that blood was about to be spilled. Nathan walked slowly across the dining room. With every step, the oxygen in the room seemed to deplete. The patrons practically pressed themselves into their velvet booths, trying to become invisible. They recognized Marcus as danger, but they recognized Nathan as death itself. He bypassed the spilled wine, bypassed the terrified waitstaff huddled by the kitchen doors. He walked straight to the debris field of broken crystal. He didn't look at Marcus. He completely ignored the man's existence. Instead, Nathan knelt. He lowered his expensive suit into the spilled water and broken glass without a second thought, bringing himself down to the eye level of the fallen girl. Stella squeezed her eyes shut as the dark figure loomed over her. She was bracing for another strike, expecting Marcus to finish what he started. But the blow never came. Instead, she smelled something entirely different. Not cheap cologne and stale liquor, but sandalwood, fresh rain, and a faint, metallic undertone of something dangerous. "Open your eyes," a voice said. It wasn't a command yelled in anger. It was a request, spoken with a terrifying, absolute calmness that vibrated in the marrow of her bones. Stella slowly opened her eyes. The world was still blurry, swimming with unshed tears and the dull throb of her head. Above her was a face carved from stone. Dark, fathomless eyes were looking down at her, not with pity, but with a cold, intense focus. Nathan reached into his breast pocket and produced a pristine, white silk handkerchief. With movements so gentle they seemed incongruous with the danger radiating from him, he reached out. Stella flinched instinctively, letting out a small whimper. Nathan's hand stopped instantly, hovering an inch from her face. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice dropping to a register that only she could hear. It was a vow. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she chose, he pressed the cool silk to the corner of her mouth, wiping away the bead of blood that had trickled from her cut lip. The extreme gentleness of the gesture, following so closely on the heels of extreme violence, broke something inside Stella. A single tear escaped, cutting a hot path down her unbruised cheek. Nathan's eyes tracked the tear. The muscle in his jaw feathered. The coldness in his eyes didn't warm, but it sharpened, turning from slate to jagged obsidian. He slowly stood up, leaving the silk handkerchief in Stella's trembling hand. He turned, finally acknowledging the rest of the room. He didn't look at Marcus yet. He looked down at the bruised, weeping girl on the floor. And then, with a voice that didn't raise in volume but seemed to echo from the very foundations of the building, he asked the question. "Who touched you?" The words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. "Who touched you?" It was a rhetorical question. Everyone in the room knew who had done it. Nathan knew who had done it. But the protocol of the underworld, the dark theater of power Nathan commanded, required the victim to point the finger. It required the scales to be balanced publicly. Marcus Vance, standing a few feet away, suddenly seemed to sober up. The arrogant flush of alcohol and rage drained from his face, replaced by a sickening, chalky pallor. He looked at Nathan, the man who held the leash to the city's worst nightmares. And for the first time that night, Marcus realized he was not the predator. He was the prey. "Mr. Vance," Marcus stammered, the name sounding like gravel in his dry throat. "Nathan, listen. It was an accident. The stupid girl dumped hot sauce all over my—" Nathan didn't look at him. He didn't blink. He kept his eyes locked on Stella, who was still clutching the white silk to her mouth, staring up at him in sheer terror. "I did not ask you," Nathan said, his voice a low, melodic purr that sent shivers down the spines of everyone within earshot. He finally shifted his gaze, slowly turning his head to look at Marcus. The look was devoid of anger. It was completely empty, which made it infinitely more terrifying. It was the look a man gives a cockroach before stepping on it. "I asked her." Nathan turned back to Stella. He crouched down again, the fabric of his trousers pulling tight over his knees. The broken glass crunched beneath his expensive shoes. "Look at me," Nathan commanded softly. Stella couldn't breathe. The air felt too thin. The pain in her face was a pulsing, rhythmic agony. but it was entirely eclipsed by the sheer gravitational pull of the man in front of her. She looked into his eyes. They were endless. "You are safe," Nathan told her, the words carrying the weight of an absolute, undeniable truth. "Nothing in this room can hurt you anymore. Do you understand?" Stella, paralyzed, managed a microscopic nod. "Good." Nathan's voice was a whisper now, meant only for her. "Now, I want you to point to the man who put his hands on you." Stella hesitated. Her mind was a whirlwind of panic. She was a waitress, a nobody. If she pointed a finger at a mobster, she was dead. If she didn't, she might be dead anyway. She looked at Marcus, who was glaring at her with a mixture of desperate pleading and thinly veiled threat. If she spoke, the fragile, invisible life she had built to protect her brother would be burned to ashes. Nathan saw the hesitation. He saw the calculation in her wide, frightened eyes. He understood the economics of fear better than anyone alive. He leaned in closer, the scent of sandalwood wrapping around her like a shield. "If you don't point at him," Nathan murmured, his lips barely moving, "I will assume it was all three of them. And I will kill all three of them right here, right now, in front of you. And then I will burn this restaurant to the ground so you never have to sweep up this glass." Stella's breath hitched. It wasn't a threat against her. It was a horrifying promise of what he was willing to do on her behalf. She saw the absolute sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't bluffing. This man, this immaculately dressed king, was completely unhinged beneath his veneer of control. Slowly, her hand, still trembling violently, raised from the floor. Her index finger extended. She didn't look at Marcus. She kept her eyes locked on Nathan as she pointed a shaking finger directly at the man in the blue suit. "Him," she whispered. The word was barely a breath, but in the silent room, it sounded like a judge's gavel slamming down on a wooden block. Nathan closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, almost as if he were taking a deep breath before plunging underwater. When he opened them, the cold emptiness was gone, replaced by a dark, terrible fire. He stood up. "Nathan." "Wait," Marcus started, his voice cracking, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "She's a nobody. A clumsy bitch. You're going to start a war over a waitress?" "No," Nathan said, his voice echoing off the high, gilded ceiling. "I'm not starting a war. I'm taking out the trash." He didn't make a grand gesture. He didn't pull a weapon. He simply gave a microscopic nod to Leo, who was still standing by the door. What happened next was a masterclass in swift, orchestrated violence. It took exactly 4 seconds. Leo moved with terrifying speed for a man his size. He crossed the distance between the door and table 4 in 3 massive strides. The 2 men flanking Marcus barely had time to reach into their jackets before Leo's heavy hands clamped onto the backs of their necks, slamming their heads together with a sickening crack that reverberated through the room. They dropped to the floor instantly, unconscious before they hit the carpet. Marcus tried to run. He lunged away from the table, slipping on the spilled wine. Before Marcus could hit the ground, Nathan was there. The absolute stillness had vanished, replaced by explosive, kinetic energy. Nathan grabbed Marcus by the collar of his ruined blue suit, hoisting the heavier man up, as if he weighed nothing. With a brutal, fluid motion, Nathan slammed Marcus face first onto the heavy oak dining table. Silverware clattered to the floor. Glasses shattered. Marcus screamed, a high-pitched, garbled sound as his nose broke against the polished wood. Nathan leaned over him, pressing his forearm against the back of Marcus's neck, pinning him entirely. The restaurant patrons were screaming now, scrambling out of their booths, slipping on the marble floors in their desperation to flee the nightmare that had suddenly erupted in their sanctuary. But Nathan paid them no mind. He leaned down, his mouth right next to Marcus's ear. "In my city, Nathan whispered, the words dripping with absolute venom. We do not touch women. We do not strike people who cannot fight back. You are an embarrassment to the air you breathe. My uncle. Marcus choked out, blood bubbling from his shattered nose, trying to invoke the name of his family boss. My uncle will kill you. Your uncle, Nathan said softly, applying an ounce more pressure to Marcus's neck, eliciting a choked gasp, is going to send me a thank you note for drowning his weakest pup. Nathan didn't break his neck. That would be too quick, too merciful, and too messy for the dining room. Instead, he signaled to the shadows near the back entrance. Two more of his men, dressed in identical dark suits, materialized from the darkness. Take him to the harbor, Nathan commanded, his voice returning to its chilling, calm baseline. The deep end. The men grabbed Marcus by the arms, dragging his thrashing, bleeding body away from the table and toward the back exit. His screams echoed through the kitchen doors and slowly faded away, swallowed by the cold, rainy night. The room was suddenly empty, save for the terrified staff, the two unconscious thugs on the floor, and Stella, who was still sitting amidst the broken glass, her mind entirely shattered by the impossible sequence of events. Nathan stood amidst the wreckage. He straightened his tie, smoothed the front of his jacket, and took a slow, deep breath, returning the monster to its cage beneath his ribs. He turned back to Stella. He walked over to her, avoiding the glass. He didn't ask if she could stand. He knew her legs wouldn't hold her. He bent down and, with shocking ease, scooped her up into his arms. Stella gasped, rigid with terror, her bruised face pressing against his chest. She felt the heavy, solid muscle beneath his suit, the rhythmic, steady beat of a heart that had just ordered a man's execution without skipping a beat. Leo, Nathan called out, holding the trembling girl against him. Yes, boss. Leave a stack of cash on the hostess stand. Enough to cover the damages and pay the staff for the week. Tell the owner to close for the night. Done. Nathan walked toward the front doors, carrying Stella through the empty, silent restaurant, the maitre d'hoirs cowering behind his podium. Nathan stopped briefly. She doesn't work here anymore, Nathan told the trembling man. If I hear you withheld a single cent of her final paycheck, I will return, and I won't be as polite. He walked out into the cold, driving rain of Viridia, the dark king carrying a broken porcelain doll into the abyss of his world. The interior of Nathan's car, a heavily armored, custom black Maybach, smelled of expensive leather and absolute safety. The windows were tinted so darkly that the neon lights of the city outside bled through as smeared, muted watercolors. It was a sensory deprivation chamber, a moving fortress designed to keep the world out. Nathan sat in the back, opposite Stella. He had placed her gently onto the plush seats, wrapping his heavy cashmere overcoat around her shivering shoulders. She looked impossibly small, swallowed by the dark fabric, a fragile ghost trapped in a steel box. She was in shock. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, her eyes wide, staring blankly at the partition separating them from Leo in the driver's seat. She was still clutching the white silk handkerchief, now spotted with dark red dots, in a white-knuckled death grip. Nathan watched her in silence as the car glided smoothly through the rain-slicked streets. He didn't attempt to comfort her with empty platitudes. He knew the trauma she was processing wasn't just the physical assault. It was the psychic shock of witnessing the veil of reality being ripped away. She had seen the raw, unvarnished power that truly ran the city, and she had seen it unleashed on her behalf. It was a terrifying debt she never asked for. Take us to the estate, Leo, Nathan said quietly, hitting a button on the armrest. A small compartment slid open, revealing a meticulously stocked first aid kit. Stella flinched at the sound of his voice. She pulled the coat tighter around herself, pressing backward into the seat. as if trying to merge with the leather. I need to go home, she stammered, her voice cracking, raspy from unshed tears. My brother, he's expecting me. The babysitter. Nathan opened the first aid kit, retrieving an instant ice pack. He cracked it in his large hands, shaking it until the chemical reaction turned it freezing cold. You can't go home, Nathan said, his tone matter-of-fact, lacking any warmth but devoid of cruelty. Not tonight, probably not tomorrow. You can't kidnap me, she whispered, her eyes filling with a new wave of panic. Please, I didn't see anything. I won't say anything. I'm nobody. I am not kidnapping you, Stella, Nathan replied. He paused, realizing he knew her name only because he had read it off the small plastic name tag pinned to her uniform before the coat covered it. I am keeping you alive. He leaned forward, holding the ice pack wrapped in a clean gauze pad out to her. She hesitated, looking at his hand as if it held a live grenade. Take it. Put it on your cheek to bring the swelling down. With agonizing slowness, she reached out and took the ice pack, pressing it against the angry, purple bruise blooming on her face. The cold stung, but it dulled the throbbing ache. Why? She asked, her voice trembling. Why am I not safe? Nathan leaned back, staring out the tinted window at the blurred city lights. Because Marcus Vance is a made man in the Romano family. Or he was. By tomorrow morning, the Romano family will know that I took him. They will know why. To them, you are not a victim. You are the excuse I used to strike at them. They will want to erase the excuse. Stella's breath hitched. The reality of his words crashed over her like a freezing ocean wave. She wasn't just fired. She was hunted. Her small, invisible life was gone. Obliterated in a matter of minutes because she served the wrong plate of food and a monster happened to be watching. My brother, she gasped, absolute terror gripping her heart. Toby. He's 10. He's at home with Mrs. Higgins. If they go to my apartment, Leo? Nathan interrupted sharply, not looking away from Stella. Already on it, boss. Leo's voice came through the intercom. I dispatched a 4-man team to the address on her employment file 10 minutes ago. They'll secure the kid and the sitter. They'll bring them to the safe house. Stella stared at Nathan, her mouth slightly open. He had thought of everything while she was still crying on the floor. He was moving chess pieces on a board she didn't even know existed. Who are you? She whispered, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Nathan finally looked at her. The streetlights passing by cast shifting shadows across his sharp features. I am the man who makes sure the monsters in this city only eat each other, he said softly. But tonight, one of them forgot the rules. And now I have to remind them all. The car turned off the main highway, ascending a winding private road that led up into the forested hills overlooking Viridia. The rain beat against the roof in a steady, drumming rhythm. What is your name? Nathan asked. Though he already knew, he wanted to hear her say it. He wanted her to reclaim a sliver of her identity. Stella, she said softly, lowering the ice pack slightly. Stella Evans. Well, Stella Evans, Nathan murmured, looking out at the iron gates of his estate parting like the jaws of a leviathan to let them in. Welcome to the underworld. Try not to slip. The estate, as Nathan called it, was less a house and more a fortified compound masquerading as a sprawling, modernist mansion. Constructed of dark slate, vast expanses of bulletproof glass and steel, it sat perched on the edge of a cliff, overlooking the glittering, infected wound of the city below. As the Maybach pulled into the subterranean garage, Stella felt a profound sense of claustrophobia. The heavy steel doors ground shut behind them with a final, echoing thud. She was entirely cut off from the world she knew. Nathan stepped out first, offering his hand. Stella ignored it, clutching the coat around her, and scrambled out of the car on shaking legs. She stood in the pristine, brightly lit garage, surrounded by millions of dollars worth of luxury vehicles, feeling like a stray dog dragged into a museum. "This way," Nathan said, gesturing toward a private elevator. They rode up in silence. When the doors opened, Stella stepped into a living space that looked like it belonged in a high-end architectural magazine. Minimalist furniture, dark wood floors, a massive fireplace, and a wall of windows that offered a panoramic view of the storm lashing the city below. It was beautiful, cold, and entirely devoid of warmth. Much like the man who owned it. "There are guest quarters down the hall to the left," Nathan instructed, shrugging off his own suit jacket, revealing a pristine white dress shirt stretched tight over broad shoulders. "There is a bathroom, clothes that should fit you, and a bed. Lock the door if it makes you feel better. Though I assure you, you are safer here than you have ever been in your entire life." Stella stood frozen in the center of the vast room. The adrenaline was finally beginning to ebb, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a hollow, aching fear. "Toby," she said, her voice small, cracking. "When will my brother be here?" Nathan pulled a cell phone from his pocket, checked a message, and slid it back. "My men are at your apartment. They are extracting him and the sitter now. They will take a circuitous route to ensure they aren't followed. He will be here in an hour." He walked over to a crystal decanter on a side table and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a heavy glass. He didn't offer her any. He knew alcohol would only make the shock worse. "Go wash your face, Stella," he said, turning to look at her, his dark eyes softening a fraction, though his face remained a mask. "Take off the uniform. It's covered in glass and bad memories." Stella nodded numbly. She turned and walked down the long, silent hallway. When she found the guest suite, she locked the heavy oak door behind her and leaned against it, sliding down until she sat on the floor. For the first time since the slap, she let out a sob. It tore out of her throat, ragged and ugly. She cried for her bruised face, for her lost job, for the terrifying uncertainty of her brother's safety, and for the sudden, violent erasure of her life. She cried until she felt hollowed out. Eventually, she dragged herself into the massive marble bathroom. She stripped off the blood-stained apron and the black uniform, leaving them in a heap on the floor. She stepped into the shower, turning the water as hot as she could stand it, scrubbing at her skin until it was raw, trying to wash away the feeling of Marcus's hand, the smell of the restaurant, the terrifying proximity of Nathan. When she stepped out, she found a set of soft, incredibly expensive cashmere loungewear folded on the vanity. She put it on. It felt like armor made of clouds. She walked back into the bedroom and jumped when a soft knock came at the door. "Stella?" It was Nathan's voice, muffled by the heavy wood. "Your brother is here." Stella scrambled to the door, fumbling with the lock, and threw it open. Standing in the hallway was her 10-year-old brother Toby. He was wearing his dinosaur pajamas, clutching a worn teddy bear, looking sleepy and entirely bewildered. Beside him stood a massive, heavily armed man who looked wildly out of place holding a small child's backpack. "Stella!" Toby cried out, his eyes widening when he saw her bruised face. He broke away from the guard and ran to her, wrapping his small arms around her waist. "Stella, what happened to your face? Who are these guys?" Mrs. Higgins was crying. Stella dropped to her knees, burying her face in his small, warm shoulder. Holding him so tightly, he squeaked, "I'm okay, baby. I'm okay. We're visiting a friend. We're safe here." She looked up over Toby's head. Nathan was standing further down the hall, watching them. The cold, impenetrable mask had slipped, slightly. For a fleeting second, Looking at the fierce, desperate way Stella clung to her brother, an expression of profound, aching sorrow crossed Nathan's features before he ruthlessly buried it. "Get some sleep, Stella," Nathan said quietly. "Tomorrow, the city wakes up. And we have work to do." He turned and walked away into the shadows of his fortress, leaving Stella to hold the only piece of her life she had left. By sunrise, the city of Viridia was bleeding. The underworld did not possess a morning paper, but gossip traveled faster than fiber optics. The news that Nathan Vance, the untouchable sovereign of the syndicate, had personally executed a made man from the Romano family over a waitress at Il Paradiso sent shockwaves through every illicit artery in the city. It was a blatant act of war. It violated a fragile 5-year truce that had kept the streets relatively quiet. The other families, the Irish mob in the docks, the Russian bratva operating the eastern supply chains, and the splintered cartels in the south, held their breath, waiting to see how the Romanos would respond. In the penthouse of a fortified high-rise downtown, Don Carmine Romano, Marcus's uncle, smashed a Ming vase against a marble wall. He was a bull of a man, fueled by pride and a volatile temper. Marcus was an idiot. Carmine knew that, but he was Romano blood. You did not kill Romano blood without paying in kind. "He wants a war?" Carmine roared, his face purple, spit flying onto the faces of his lieutenants. "He disrespects our name for a piece of trash serving pasta? Fine. We burn his supply lines. We hit his counting houses. We find the girl, and we send her back to him in boxes." Back at the estate, the morning sun pierced the heavy clouds, casting long, sharp shadows across Nathan's office. He stood by the window, a cup of black coffee cooling in his hand, watching the city below. He had not slept. The estate was buzzing with quiet, lethal activity. Dozens of heavily armed men patrolled the perimeter. SUVs with tinted windows came and went, carrying orders, money, and weapons. The war machine was waking up. Leo stepped into the office, carrying a secure tablet. "The Romanos hit 3 of our numbers fronts in the South Ward an hour ago," Leo reported, his voice flat. "Firebombs. 2 of our guys are in the burn ward. They also made a run at one of the port warehouses, but our security repelled them. 4 Romano hitters dead." Nathan took a slow sip of his coffee. He didn't blink. "And the girl's apartment? Burned to the ground 20 minutes ago," Leo said. "If she and the kid had been there, they'd be ashes." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Increase the perimeter security here. No one goes in or out without my explicit verbal authorization. Have the snipers rotate shifts on the roof. Boss." Leo hesitated. "A rare occurrence. The commission, the other families. They're requesting a sit-down. They're terrified this is going to spill into the streets, bring the feds down on everyone. They want to know why you broke the truce over a civilian. Tell them the truce wasn't broken by me. It was broken by an animal who forgot the hierarchy of respect," Nathan said coldly. "Set the sit-down for tomorrow night at the Continental, neutral ground. Are you sure? Carmine might try to hit you there. Carmine is a blunt instrument. He won't risk hitting me in front of the other heads. He'll want to scream and demand blood. I'll give him a chance to walk away. If he doesn't take it..." Nathan turned away from the window, his eyes dark. "We erase the Romano name from the map." Downstairs, Stella woke up in a bed larger than her entire bedroom at the apartment. The sheets felt like liquid silk. For a moment, suspended in the hazy space between sleep and wakefulness, she forgot. Then, the dull throb in her cheek flared, and the memory of the restaurant, the glass, the blood, and the dark king came rushing back. She sat up, panicking, until she saw a lump under the covers next to her. Toby. He was snoring softly, clutching his bear. Stella exhaled. A shaky breath. She slipped out of bed, padded into the bathroom, and looked in the mirror. The bruise was spectacular. Deep purples, angry reds, and sickly yellows painted the left side of her face. Her eye was swollen shut. She looked like a monster. She dressed in the cashmere clothes, feeling like an imposter, and crept out of the room. She needed coffee. She needed to know what was happening. She wandered through the silent, massive house until she found the kitchen. It was an industrial-grade space, gleaming with stainless steel. Sitting at the massive marble island was Nathan. He was wearing a fresh suit, minus the jacket and tie, his sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faded scars. He was looking at a laptop, a grim expression on his face. He looked up as she entered. He took in her bruised face, the way she shrunk into herself, hovering near the doorway. "There's coffee in the carafe," he said softly, closing the laptop. "There's food in the fridge. My chef isn't here today. The staff has been sent away for their safety." Stella moved to the counter, pouring a cup of coffee with shaking hands. "My apartment," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Did you get my things? Toby's clothes? My art supplies?" Nathan stared at her. The silence stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. "Your apartment is gone, Stella," he said gently, delivering the blow with surgical precision. "The Romanos burned it down this morning. Everything is gone." Stella froze. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the tile floor, splashing hot, brown liquid over her bare feet. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers. "Gone," she gasped, her good eye widening in horror. "But the photos of my parents, the hospital bills, Toby's school projects." She fell to her knees amidst the broken ceramic, a horrifying parallel to the night before. She wasn't crying. She was hyperventilating, the shock pushing her past tears into pure panic. Her entire life, everything she had painstakingly scraped together to survive, was reduced to ash because she handed a man the wrong plate of veal. Nathan was out of his chair in a millisecond. He crossed the kitchen, kneeling on the floor in front of her. Ignoring the hot coffee soaking into his trousers, he grabbed her shoulders firmly, forcing her to look at him. "Breathe. Stella, look at me. Breathe." "It's all gone," she choked out, clawing at her own chest. "My life is gone. What did you do? Why didn't you just let him hit me? Why did you have to do this?" It was the first time she had raised her voice. The accusation hung in the air. She was blaming him, and Nathan knew, with absolute certainty, she was right. His pride, his code, had destroyed her world. He didn't defend himself. He didn't get angry. He absorbed her pain with a stoic, devastating grace. "I couldn't let him," Nathan said softly, his voice a low rumble. "I have built an empire on blood and fear, Stella. I have done things that would make you sick, but I drew a line. A long time ago, I drew a line. Innocents are not touched. If I let that man break you in my city, without consequence, then I am no longer a king. I am just another monster." He reached out, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears that were finally beginning to fall from her good eye. "Your apartment is gone. Your old life is dead," Nathan said, his eyes burning with an intense, terrifying promise. "But I swear to you on my soul, you will not lose anything else. I will build you a new life, a better one. But first, I have to burn down the men who took your old one." Stella looked at him, terrified of him, furious at him, yet completely dependent on him. In the ruins of her life, this dark, dangerous man was the only solid thing left to hold on to. For the next 3 days, Stella and Toby lived in a gilded cage. The estate became a command center. Heavily armed men moved with purposeful urgency through the halls. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee gun oil, and tension. Nathan was rarely seen. He was locked in his office or out in the city, managing the chaotic, bloody skirmishes that were erupting across Viridia. Stella tried to keep a sense of normalcy for Toby. She found art supplies in one of the spare rooms Nathan had apparently ordered them delivered and spent hours drawing with her brother, trying to distract him from the men with rifles standing outside their door. Despite the terror, a strange rhythm developed. Stella began to see the cracks in Nathan's armor. One evening, deep into the night, she crept down to the kitchen for a glass of water. She found Nathan sitting in the dark living room, staring out the massive window at the city. He looked exhausted. The sharp lines of his face were drawn tight, shadows pooling beneath his eyes. A glass of untouched whiskey sat beside him. She hesitated, then walked softly into the room. He didn't turn, but he knew she was there. "You shouldn't be awake," he murmured, his voice rough. "I couldn't sleep," she replied, sitting carefully on the opposite end of the long leather sofa. They sat in silence for a long time. The city below looked like a scattering of diamonds on black velvet. It looked peaceful. It was a lie. "Is it bad?" she asked quietly. "It is complicated," Nathan replied, leaning his head back against the sofa. "The Romanos are striking wildly. They're hurting my businesses, but they're hurting themselves more. They lack discipline. When will it end?" "Tomorrow night," he said, turning his head to look at her. In the dim moonlight, her bruise looked like a dark shadow. "I am meeting with the heads of the families. The commission, Carmine Romano, will be there. We will settle it." "How?" Nathan looked back out at the city. "One way or another, blood will pay for blood." Stella shivered, pulling her sweater tighter. "You talk about blood like it's currency. In my world, Stella, it is the only currency that holds its value." He paused, a heavy, introspective silence filling the space between them. "I never meant to drag you into this. You were just trying to do your job. I saw that animal strike you, and something inside me snapped. I saw my mother." Stella looked at him, surprised. It was the most personal thing he had ever said. "My father was a cruel man," Nathan continued, his voice devoid of emotion, a clinical recitation of trauma. "He ran the syndicate before me. He ruled by terror, and he didn't leave that terror at the door when he came home. He beat my mother constantly, and everyone in his organization knew, and no one did a thing, because he was the boss." Nathan picked up the glass of whiskey, staring at the amber liquid but not drinking it. "When I was 18, I walked into his office, put a bullet in his head, and took his chair. I purged his loyalists. I rebuilt the organization with rules, discipline, and the paramount rule was that the innocent, the civilians, the women, they are off limits. If I let Marcus Vance walk away from hitting you, I am validating everything my father was. I would be spitting on my mother's grave." Stella stared at him, the fear slowly mutating into a complex, sorrowful understanding. He wasn't just a monster. He was a damaged boy trapped inside a king, frantically trying to control a chaotic world to prevent history from repeating itself. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Nathan finally took a drink, the liquor burning down his throat. "Don't be sorry for me, Stella. I chose this life. You didn't." He stood up, walking over to her. He stood close, looking down at her, the scent of sandalwood wrapping around her. He reached out, his hand hovering near her bruised cheek, before he gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was electric, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. "Go to sleep," he said softly. "Tomorrow, I end this, and then I will set you free." He walked away, swallowed by the shadows of his massive, lonely house, leaving Stella staring after him, her heart pounding a frantic, confused rhythm in her chest. The Continental Hotel was neutral ground, a relic of an older, more refined era of organized crime. Its subterranean levels housed a massive, soundproof boardroom where the commission met to avoid total war. Nathan sat at the head of the long oak table, Leo standing impassively behind him. Across from him sat Carmine Romano, his face a mask of trembling, apoplectic rage. Flanking them were the heads of the Irish and Russian syndicates, old men with cold eyes who simply wanted the disruption to their cash flow to stop. The air in the room was toxic, heavy with the smell of cigar smoke and impending violence. "You killed my nephew," Carmine spat, slamming a meaty fist onto the table. "You drowned him like a rat over a spilled plate of pasta. You disrespected my blood, Vance. You expect us to just sit here and broker peace?" "I expect you to listen, Carmine," Nathan said, his voice quiet, deadly calm, cutting through the older man's bluster. "Your nephew broke a cardinal rule. He struck a civilian in a public place under my protection. He was an undisciplined dog. I put him down." "She was a waitress!" Carmine roared, standing up, his chair scraping violently. "A nobody!" "You're risking billions of dollars, risking bringing the alphabet boys down on all of us, for a piece of ass you don't even know?" Nathan didn't raise his voice, but his eyes flared with a sudden, demonic intensity. "Watch your mouth, Carmine." The Russian boss, a man named Yuri, cleared his throat. "Nathaniel, we respect your rules, but the punishment, it was severe, and the retaliation has cost us all. A tax must be paid. Concessions must be made." "I will make no concessions," Nathan stated, leaning forward, resting his clasped hands on the table. He looked at each man in turn. "If I concede, I tell every foot soldier in this city that they can do whatever they want to the people who serve their food, clean their streets, and live in their neighborhoods, as long as they pay a fine afterward. I will not allow this city to become a playground for your animals." "You arrogant prick," Carmine hissed. "You think you're better than us? You're a thug in a nice suit. You want a war? You have one. My men will not stop until your empire is ash." Nathan stared at Carmine for a long, heavy moment. Then he sighed, a sound of genuine weariness. "I was hoping you'd be reasonable, Carmine," Nathan said softly. "I really was." Nathan reached into his jacket pocket. Instantly, every bodyguard in the room tensed, hands diving for weapons. Nathan ignored them, slowly pulling out his cell phone. He placed it on the table and pushed it toward Carmine. "Look at the screen," Nathan ordered. Carmine sneered, but he looked down. On the screen was a live video feed. It showed the interior of a lavishly decorated bedroom. Sleeping in the bed was a young woman and a toddler. Carmine's face instantly drained of all color. The ruddy purple rage was replaced by a sickly, bone-white terror. It was his daughter and his grandson at their heavily guarded compound in the suburbs. "How?" Carmine choked out, his eyes wide. "Your perimeter security is expensive, Carmine, but they are loyal to money, not blood," Nathan said, his voice entirely devoid of inflection. "My men have been inside your daughter's house for 2 hours. They are standing by her bed right now." The other bosses at the table shifted uncomfortably, realizing the terrifying depth of Nathan's reach. He hadn't just been defending his territory. He had been surgically placing the knife at the throat of his enemy while they were distracted by street fights. "You said innocents were off limits," Carmine whispered, a tear of sheer panic forming in his eye. "They are," Nathan replied, "which is why my men are going to walk out of that house without waking them, provided you agree to my terms." Carmine slumped back into his chair, a defeated, broken man. "What are your terms?" "You step down. Tonight, you hand control of the Romano family to your underboss, Paulie. He is a pragmatic man. He understands business. You will take a private jet to a villa in Sicily, and you will never set foot in Viridia again." All hostilities cease immediately. All damages to my property and the property of the girl you burned down will be paid from your personal accounts." Nathan leaned back, buttoning his suit jacket. "Or you refuse, and I end your bloodline before the sun comes up. Make your choice." Carmine looked at the phone, then at Nathan. He saw no bluff. He saw only the cold, mechanical inevitability of death. "I'll step down," Carmine rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves. "Good," Nathan said, standing up. He looked at the other bosses. "The war is over. The rules remain absolute. Enjoy your evening, gentlemen." He turned and walked out of the room, Leo following silently behind, leaving the high table in a state of terrified, reverent silence. The transition of power was swift and brutal, handled primarily by Nathan's lieutenants. Paulie Romano, eager to avoid his predecessor's fate, immediately ordered his men to stand down. The fires in the city were put out. The streets returned to their usual, manageable level of corruption. Nathan returned to the estate just before dawn. The adrenaline crash was absolute. He felt hollowed out, carrying the weight of the lives he had manipulated, threatened, and ended. He walked into his office, poured a heavy glass of whiskey, and drank it down in one burning gulp. He had won. His empire was secure. His rules were cemented in the bedrock of the city. But as he looked out the window at the rising sun, painting the smog of Viridia in harsh shades of orange and gray, he felt no victory. He thought of Stella. He thought of the way she had looked at him in the kitchen, terrified of the monster but desperately clinging to the man. He thought of the softness of her hair when he had touched it. He thought of a life where he didn't have to carry the scent of cordite and blood on his skin. He walked out of his office and down the silent hall to the guest wing. He opened the door softly. Stella was awake. She was sitting in an armchair by the window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the dawn. Toby was asleep in the bed. She turned when he entered. The swelling on her face had gone down slightly, the bruise settling into a deep, ugly purple. "It's over," Nathan said quietly, standing in the doorway. "The Romanos have surrendered. Carmine is gone. The city is quiet." Stella let out a long, shuddering breath, her shoulders dropping as the crushing weight of the past few days finally lifted. "We're safe?" "You're safe," Nathan confirmed. He stepped into the room, maintaining a respectful distance. "I have set up a trust in your name. It contains more than enough money to cover Toby's medical bills for the rest of his life, pay for your art school, and buy a house in a good neighborhood, far away from the east side, far away from the city center." Stella stared at him, overwhelmed. "Nathan, I can't take that. I just want my life back." "Your old life is gone, Stella. I took it from you. This is the restitution," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Leo will drive you to a temporary luxury apartment this morning. All the paperwork is there. New identities if you want them, though you won't need them. No one in this city will ever look at you sideways again." He was speaking rapidly, clinically, trying to build a wall between them before he did something foolish, like ask her to stay. Stella stood up, letting the blanket fall from her shoulders. She walked slowly toward him. He tensed, his instinct screaming at him to step back, to keep the distance. But he stood his ground. She stopped a foot away from him. She looked up into his dark, ancient eyes. She saw the ruthlessness, the violence, but she also saw the profound, aching loneliness that he wore like a second skin. "You're sending me away," she said softly. "I am setting you free," he corrected. "You do not belong in my world, Stella. My world is dark, it's violent, it ruins everything it touches. I will not ruin you. You saved me," she whispered, raising a trembling hand. Nathan caught her wrist before her hand could touch his face. His grip was firm, but gentle. "I killed for you, Stella. There is a difference. Don't confuse the monster with a savior." He slowly lowered her hand, letting go. The loss of contact felt like a physical blow to them both. "Have a good life, Stella," Nathan said, his voice thick with an emotion he refused to name. "Paint beautiful things. Take care of your brother." He turned and walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. Stella stood alone in the quiet room, a tear slipping down her bruised cheek. She had survived the underworld, but she had left a piece of her soul with its king. 3 months later, the small bell above the door of the sunlit art supply store in the affluent West End chimed. Stella walked in, a canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder, holding Toby's hand. Her face had healed perfectly. The bruise was a memory, leaving behind a pale, unblemished porcelain complexion. She looked different. The constant, gnawing anxiety that used to pinch the corners of her eyes was gone. She was attending classes. Toby's treatments were fully funded. They lived in a beautiful, quiet house with a garden. She walked the aisles, picking out expensive oil paints she used to only dream of affording. She was safe. Nathan had kept his word. The city of Viridia had shifted. It was still corrupt, still dangerous, but a new, unbreakable law hummed beneath the surface. The innocents were untouchable. The story of the waitress and the Mafia Boss had become a dark fairy tale whispered among the syndicates, a terrifying reminder of the wrath of Nathan Vance. Stella paid for her paints and stepped back out into the bright afternoon sun. As she walked down the street, a sleek, black Maybach silently glided past her in the opposite direction. The windows were heavily tinted. She couldn't see inside. But as the car passed, it slowed for a fraction of a second. Inside the sensory deprivation chamber of the Maybach, Nathan sat in the darkness. Through the dark glass, he watched her. He saw the color in her cheeks, the easy way she smiled at her brother, the absence of fear in her posture. He watched her until she turned a corner and disappeared from view. He felt a familiar, cold ache in his chest, a ghost of a life he could never have. He had built her a sanctuary in the sun, but he was forever condemned to rule the shadows. He looked down at his hands, hands that had built an empire and broken men, hands that had gently wiped blood from a porcelain cheek. "Keep driving, Leo," Nathan said softly, leaning back into the darkness. The Maybach accelerated, vanishing into the smog and concrete of the city. The king returned to his throne of ash and iron, ruling over a silent, terrified city, his heart anchored to a ghost, walking in the sunlight. The city remained quiet, not out of peace, but out of fear, because they all knew what happened when a single, terrifying question was asked. Who touched you? True power is not measured by the violence one can inflict, but by the restraint one exercises and the boundaries one is willing to defend. Nathan's empire was built on blood, but it was sustained by a twisted, unyielding moral code. His actions remind us that even in the darkest, most corrupt corners of the world, the instinct to protect the innocent can spark a devastating fire. Stella's survival is a testament to resilience, a fragile flower blooming in the scorched earth left behind by a king's wrath. If this cinematic journey through the shadows of Viridia captivated you, please leave a like. Share this story with fellow lovers of dark romance and crime drama, and subscribe for more deep, immersive narratives.